Welcome to Talk South Asian to Me, Season 2. My name is Michelle.
And my name is Anisha. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central and hear us react to each other's stories about mental health and growing up in different South Asian households.
And remember, this podcast is not therapy. Engage with what feels entertaining and resonates with you, and leave what doesn't. Okay, let's get into our topic. You ready for our topic reveal?
Yes.
Okay, we are on letter I, and our topic for this letter is illness, how chronic illness affects mental health. Dun, dun, dun. This is I feel like when I was deep diving into this topic too, there's just so much out there. I can probably sit here and talk for hours if I wanted to.
Wow.
That's how much information I found, but then I also like my personal experience, what I do for work, so much of it relates to this topic. And so you were right. I think this is a great topic for me to research. But I'm excited to hear your story and share my story too. So it'll be good.
It's gonna
So
be
when it comes,
yeah. I think that, even though you found so much, which I guess I'm not really that surprised, but I am surprised in the sense that this isn't really something that is talked about often.
Yes, it is.
So I'm excited for us to be able to start the topic. Yeah, it should.
So just to for the purpose of this podcast and our time constraint, I kind of focused on research that is the most recent, maybe like the last couple years that is credible. And then of course I'll combine it with my own experience as well in my work when supporting patients and families coping with chronic illness. So you ready? We're going to, of course, start off with definitions. And I have some different definitions for the same concept. And I think it's beneficial and important to say all those definitions just because the research out there looks at different aspects or those different types of definitions. So according to the American Psychological Association, they use the words chronic illness. And they say that a chronic illness is one that persists for a long period. Chronic illnesses include many major diseases and conditions such as heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and arthritis. Disease management is important when dealing with chronic illness. This includes ensuring adherence to treatment and maintaining quality of life. Okay? And then I have another definition from the National Institute of Mental Health. They have an article on this, and they use the term chronic disease. And they define this as a chronic disease is a condition that lasts at least 1 year and requires ongoing medical attention or limits activities of daily living or both. Examples of chronic diseases include autoimmune disorder and then epilepsy, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, we already said, HIV, AIDS, hypothyroidism, multiple sclerosis. I can't even say it. Sclerosis and pain. Yes, and pain. I really appreciated that they added pain as well as a chronic disease, which is something that by itself is a stigma as well. And then, of course, the Psychology Today article, I also wanted to include that definition or just kind of an overview about chronic illness. So Psychology Today says that tens of millions of American adults live with a chronic illness, and many of them live with at least two. Life with a chronic illness typically requires lifestyle changes that may be challenging or stressful to adopt, such as a new diet or exercise regimen, demanding medication and checkup schedules, and limitations on social life, work, and travel. Any of these can cause stress, anxiety, anger, and in some cases, depression. So that was kind of like the overall definition, maybe some sprinkle of mental health too, but I thought it was really important to share the different, experts out there and their definitions, right? We have like the National Institute of Mental Health, we have Psychology Today, we have American Psychological Association. So all those definitions. Then I found an article from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. It's an article called The Intersection of Mental Health and Chronic Disease by Grace Fernandez, and it was published in December 2021, so very recent. So I'm going to share some quotes from this article that stood out to me. So again, the title kind of talks about the intersectionality between mental health and chronic disease. So receiving a diagnosis of a chronic illness can be life-altering. Along with the day-to-day physical symptoms of the illness, emotions such as sadness, grief, and denial, as well as an added financial burden, can follow a diagnosis. So they give Grace Fernandez, the author, gives an example. A patient who is diagnosed with diabetes, for example, will be instructed to visit several specialists each year, including an endocrinologist, ophthalmologist. Oh my gosh, why can't I speak today? I'm so sorry. And podiatrist.
Eye doctor.
Right. But rarely are patients referred to a mental health specialist as part of their treatment plan. Key last sentence right? This article also discusses some statistics I wanted to share. This is again, right? This is from 2021. Roughly 37 million Americans have diabetes. 37 million Americans have diabetes, and they are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop depression than people without diabetes. But only 25% to 50% of diabetics with depression get diagnosed and treated. So only a quarter of those 37 million people that develop depression get treated for the depression. Yeah. So that was from Johns Hopkins. You having something to say? I see you shaking your head.
It's just so sad.
I know. I was like shocked a little bit by these numbers, I will say. I mean, I wasn't shocked by like how many people have diabetes, but the fact that only a quarter to half get that depression diagnosed and treated, like that's not okay. You're right, makes me sad.
And that could be for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, sometimes there's an access to care problem. It's the financial burden of everything that you said about that comes with, having diabetes. There's a certain financial burden, and then to add on to that, treating depression can, be a lot too. So there's a lot of reasons that might be the case. And maybe some of that depression too might just seem like, what's the point if that depression is bad enough? Because I'll get into it a little bit later with my story, but having a chronic illness can, make you have a sense of like helplessness, hopelessness.
Right.
And if you're depressed, that's just going to exacerbate
it's like a cycle.
So much more. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's like how do I say it? Just like a cycle, like it goes back and forth. Like depression develops, you're not motivated, you don't take your medicine, or you don't take care of your diet when it comes to maybe like a chronic illness like diabetes that requires a lot of attention to your diet and exercise. And it just keeps going, right? Like then your diabetes might get worse, which causes more depression, right? Just like worsened symptoms of depression. Just a cycle, yeah. And then I also found an article, again, by the National Institute of Mental Health. The article is titled Understanding the Link Between Chronic Disease and Depression. And it said it was revised in 2024. So this article is very recent. Yes. So the authors of this article say people who have a chronic disease are at a higher risk of developing depression. And they kind of list some ways that depression can be triggered. So depression can be triggered by anxiety, stress, or other challenges caused by a chronic disease. Brain changes from a chronic disease, such as Parkinson's disease or stroke. Medication used to treat a chronic disease, right? So medication can maybe have side effects that can, lead to depression. A personal or family history of depression or suicide. Research suggests that people who have a chronic disease and depression tend to have more severe symptoms of both illnesses, which we just talked about, like more severe symptoms. So they can experience anxiety, stress, right? That can be caused by a chronic disease. There might be some brain chemical changes due to a chronic disease that can lead to depression. Medication side effects can lead to depression. And then, of course, family history can also be linked to depression. And then there was another aspect of this article, which I thought was so interesting to share. And it was interesting for me to read too, but after reading this, I was like, okay, maybe this kind of makes sense, is that the authors say that depression can lead to chronic illness. So the other way around. So the quote that I have from this part of the article is that people who have depression are at a higher risk of developing certain chronic diseases, including heart disease, diabetes, stroke, pain, and Alzheimer's disease. This may be due to challenges completing tasks that are good for health, right? When the person depressed, they might have a hard time doing tasks that are good for their health, such as eating well and exercising. There's challenges accessing medical care that could help prevent, detect, or treat physical health issues early and avoid the progression of a chronic disease. Mm-hmm. And then
it's not that depression, having like long-term depression doesn't make you have these medical issues, chronic issues, but rather the behaviors that you experience, the symptoms of that depression can pave the way.
Yes.
Chronic illness.
Yes. And depression can change the way the body functions too, right? Prolonged depression, such as increased inflammation, reduced blood circulation, heart rate control, and abnormalities in stress hormones, which I thought that was interesting, right? The psychosomatic symptoms of, right? That, right? We've talked about that, how like our mental health can have physical manifestations. So, long-term depression can cause that inflammation or reduce blood circulation or heart. That can, prolonged of that can also lead to chronic illness. So that was so interesting how there was a whole flip side to this too. And I guess I have thought about it like the psychosomatic symptoms, but I didn't really know how much it can relate to chronic illness, which is a big deal.
Right. Or even like that recognition that this depression can pave the way. I mean, like logically when you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But you don't really see that direct link.
Right. Right. So I wanted to now go into the experience of chronic illness, just what is online, what's out there, of like how chronic illness can affect a person's psychology, like the person who's diagnosed or like someone who is a close one or a loved one around a person with like chronic illness. So this Psychology Today article discusses that people with chronic illness experience grief. I know we talked about that a couple episodes ago, right? It's a loss. So a quote from this article is that research, however, has consistently found that patients who face the reality of their diagnosis directly rather than avoiding it and who seek help rather than retreating report a greater life satisfaction. So again, there's a positive side to this too. That if a person, right, that if people kind of face head on their chronic illness, they seek help, they have social support, they have a greater life satisfaction. For example, if they discuss all their questions with their doctors, they report less stress than other patients. Social support, professional counseling can also help to manage their illness for years or decades and they're able to live in the present, accept mortality, avoid rumination, and take an active role in their treatment and physical health. So we have, even though they're experiencing grief and loss, right, there is a way of showing resilience, which we've talked about it before as well, build that resilience and kind of face their chronic illness head on and learn to cope with it. But again, that takes a lot of work, right? It takes, maybe professional support, social support, and this article kind of goes into about how people who don't kind of find some certainty, like if they live with uncertainty about their chronic illness, they're not seeking answers, they're not facing it head on, they can actually experience their symptoms from their chronic illness worsen or flare up even more. Right. Again, that like catch-22, like you talked about, like the seesaw, like it just keeps going back and forth. So now I have another part of this article that I read is how to support someone with the chronic illness. So if you have a loved one who is diagnosed with a chronic illness, how can you support them? So one was, I really like that the author of this article gave specific tangible examples, like what to say and all of that. So one thing was communication is very crucial. A quote from this article is that be clear and direct with statements of caring and offers of practical help. And if the individual requests privacy or discretion, limit what you reveal to those outside the family or circle of close friends. So don't gossip, right? This
Not your
is, I
story to
think, what?
it's like it's not your story to tell.
It's not. It's not. You're right. It's not your story to tell. And then I think this was one of the most helpful parts of this article is that common misconceptions about chronic illness. The way they look may not reflect how the person feels physically. So many people misunderstand the connection between a patient's mental and physical state. The fact that stress may make someone feel worse does not mean their condition is all in their head. I feel like that we see that maybe a lot in our South Asian community too, where it's just like, oh, it's all in your head. You're not really feeling worse. Like it's just you feeling stressed, right? Dismissing their
Call that
symptoms.
invisible illness.
Right. Invisible illness. And many imagine that if someone rests before an outing, they should feel better. And similarly, that if they are having a good time, they must be feeling better. But neither may be true. So debunking all those common misconceptions, right? If a person with chronic illness decides to rest before their outing and they come to that outing, it's not okay to assume that they are okay, right? They probably just rested a little bit to gather enough energy to go out.
Yeah.
Some statements that the authors gave was, instead of saying like, I hope you're doing well, you say, I hope you are well as possible. How are you really feeling? And then providing active listening. Those are good strategies to give instead of like having phrases that might include some assumptions.
Yeah. And if we do have any listeners today who are family members of somebody with chronic illness, I think this is one of the most important things to recognize, right? It's a chronic illness. And as much as you want the best for your loved ones, to always feel happy and healthy, and it's important to recognize that's what you want. That's also what they want, but it's what you want. So try not to put your wants and your frustration of not being able to be there for your loved one on them with the expectation of, you're not feeling better. What am I doing? What aren't you doing?
Right.
It's sometimes not that helpful. Doesn't serve anybody.
Exactly. Those are really good tips. It's important to keep those in mind. You're absolutely right. It's really easy the chronic word to like dismiss that. Like it's a lived experience. It's something that the person has to live with. It's chronic. Right. And as much as a person who doesn't live with a chronic illness wants to understand how they feel, like you won't. Right. So it's not your place to judge. And I can speak from that non-chronic illness person's perspective, right? I will never understand what that person is going through, and that's okay, right? That's why you provide active listening. That's why you ask questions that don't have hidden assumptions, which is really important.
And you can emotionally regulate when you feel frustrated because you just want, your loved one to feel better.
Right.
But instead of stressing all over them and making them feel bad that they're not feeling better, learn to emotionally regulate yourself and recognize that it's coming from a place of love, but saying that, oh, it's happening again, like it's not really helpful. That's not maybe what they want to hear.
It's also making the other person maybe feel guilty about the chronic disease and illness, which is not in their control. A lot of these chronic illnesses are based on maybe like genetic factors, right? Environmental factors that are maybe not in their control. And which is really important to emphasize. And our assumptions.
And even if there are some things like within their control, like you said earlier, right, Michelle, you said, sometimes a lifestyle change is required. Think about what that means. A lifestyle change. That means changing diet, changing exercise, changing attitudes, changing the way you approach things.
Right.
That's so much change. If you put yourself in their shoes and you have to do that forever because it's chronic, that's a lot of work. So if someone's not doing the work to, keep up with it, maintain it all the time, you can gently, lovingly point it out, perhaps, but don't,
Mm-hmm.
don't be like, you're not doing this. That's why you're feeling bad. You should do
Right.
this. It's icky, to
It
feel
is
that way, to
icky.
think that way, to say that to someone, because this
Mm-hmm.
is something you have to deal with forever. It's a sustainability thing, right?
Right.
You have to work with what you can, with what capacity you have. And sometimes some of these chronic illnesses, you don't feel like you have
Yeah.
capacity. And that's what you need.
Exactly. Exactly.
Compassion. That's what's needed.
Compassion. There you go.
Yeah.
So I have one last article I wanted to talk about in my research. Again, another Psychology Today article called Living with Chronic Illness. Just some key points from this article is that, and we kind of already touched on this too, chronic disease can change the quality of a person's life. Chronic disease is often invisible to those around us. We must hold hope and have compassion, like you said, for ourselves while we search for answers. So that was kind of like my background research about it. And now we're going to get into the South Asian community. You ready for this? Okay. So the first one I wanted to talk about was a 2023 recently published research article. It's pretty hefty. It's a review article of studies examining the chronic disease in South Asians in the US. It's titled Metabolic Syndrome and Chronic Disease Risk in South Asian Immigrants, a review of prevalence, factors, and interventions. So I'm just going to read the quick abstract summary because I have some other articles or facts and statistics I want to share too. So this is the abstract. South Asians are among the fastest growing ethnic groups in the US. Metabolic syndrome is a condition that is characterized by multiple health factors that increase the risk for chronic diseases such as cardiovascular disease and diabetes. So, metabolic syndrome prevalence among South Asian immigrants ranges from 27 to 47% in multiple cross-sectional studies using different criteria, which is generally higher compared to other populations. Both genetic and environmental factors are attributed to this increased prevalence. So it's saying that the 27 to 47% is the prevalence of these factors that increase the risk of chronic disease, such as cardiovascular and diabetes. So that was really interesting. Have you heard of the South Asian Public Health Association? Have you heard of that?
Okay.
Yeah, it's like at SAPHA.org, South Asian Public Health Association. They had some facts that I wanted to share. So almost 1 in 4 U.S. South Asians have diabetes. That's one out of every 4 South Asians in the U.S. have diabetes. Over 1 in 4 U.S. South Asians have hypertension. And South Asian migrants have 3 to 5 times risk of heart attacks and death than other ethnic groups. Yes. And then this article is published in 2023 in May by the American Heart Association. This article is written by Michael Marshall, and the title is Why Are South Asians Dying of Heart Disease? Masala Looks for Answers. So Masala is like all in caps, and it's a title. I don't know if you heard of this study. It's like a really large study that's happening in the US. It stands for the Mediators of Atherosclerosis in South Asians Living in America. So this is really giant study that was launched in 2010. And so far from 2010 to now, 906 people between the ages of 40 and 84 from the Chicago and Francisco areas have been included in the study. So they're kind of studying to find the answer of that question, right? Like what's the link? Like why are South Asians more at risk of heart disease? So they found a couple things so far, which I'm excited to share just for some context. So the study so far has shown that South Asian people have a very high prevalence of diabetes and prediabetes, as well as high blood pressure. One of the co-founders of this study said this, as he's a professor of medicine. South Asian people store fat differently than other ethnic groups in the US. In South Asians, fat gets concentrated on the liver, especially in around abdominal organs, which may be why there is so much diabetes and possibly more cardiovascular disease. And then South Asian people have higher levels of a type of cholesterol called lipoprotein A or LPA, which has been associated with a higher risk of heart disease and stroke. So it's like so far the study has been finding just that the makeup of the body of South Asians is just different. And so the food that we're eating, right, in the US, we just might digest or store very differently than the person next to us. And I really appreciate this article and this study because there were so many studies out there that were just focused on the BMI and everything, which was not accurate. And so I think this was probably like very accurate, and I appreciated that there is some efforts going into this.
Good fun.
And they have some more explanations. I want to read that quickly. Just behind these study findings is that a lot of these study participants are immigrants, and so they were interviewing them as well and getting quotes. So one of the co-founders, the researchers, said that they were moved when immigrants said being asked to be part of the study had sent them a message that we matter, which is really cool. And then some other like links that they speculate, right? This is not studied yet, but they want to, is that vegetarianism, common in India, is often thought of as healthy. But Masala, which is a study, identified 3 distinct dietary patterns among South Asians in the US that might be related to like the high risk of cardiovascular disease, such as, even though it's vegetarian diets, these are high in dairy products and saturated fats and low in fresh fruits and vegetables. So others who eat a healthy vegetarian diet that includes more legumes, am I saying that right? Legumes?
Yeah.
And fresh fruits and vegetables, right? So they're kind of looking at that. They're hoping to look at that as like the foods that they eat. What are the contents of it? Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting.
So it's specifically vegetarians who eat more like high dairy products that are linked to this, but the vegetarians who eat more like fruits, veggies, legumes, they're not quite as linked.
Right. Or they're kind of speculating. This is more like explanations. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it has been said that dairy is pretty inflammatory, particularly the kind of dairy that we consume here in America is very inflammatory.
Right. So I just love
inflammation is a big part of chronic illnesses usually. So that makes sense.
It's a really good article. And I love that the American Heart Association like posts this. And I didn't even know that there was this giant study happening. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, and then I wanted to kind of share a little bit more of just what our South Asian community is doing when it comes to chronic illness. So have you ever heard of Chronically Brown? Have you ever heard of that?
Is that like a social media account?
So that's a nonprofit organization that tackles the stigma of disability and like illness within the South Asian community. It's founded by Sukhjeen Kaur. So go Sukhjeen. I hope I'm saying that right, your name. But that's so awesome. There's an article written about Chronically Brown. This article was published in July 2022 by Brina Patel. So I'm just going to read some quick quotes. So Brina says, I've seen disabled South Asian women not being able to talk about their health or any aspect of access because it's viewed that they need to be the caregiver, right? Cooking and cleaning. Like they don't have time to have a chronic illness. Chronic illness is invisible. And then the author kind of gives a shout out to Chronically Brown, the nonprofit organization. So Sukhjeen was the one who was being interviewed by Brina, I believe, and these quotes were spoken by Sukhjeen. So like the disabled South Asian woman quote I just shared was, I believe, by Sukhjeen. And then the SAFA, the South Asian Public Health Association, they say that stigma towards mental health is a major barrier to getting help. Studies among U.S. South Asians suggest personal stigma may be greater than public stigma, which was so interesting to point out. Like the internalization of the stigma may be the barrier more than the public.
Internalized shame and guilt for maybe having a chronic illness or anything.
Exactly. So I know that was a lot of heavy research and stuff, but of course I went into TikTok and I wanted to see what's out there because this is a very hot topic too. And, I wanted to see more perspectives, and TikTok is a great place for us to look at for that as well. So I found a TikTok account named Dara, and in the bio it says a baldy living life with chronic illness. And so I was looking at these videos, and this person's videos, I guess Dara's, had a lot of hashtags, and one of them was like alopecia, South Asian, chronic illness. It was a lot of like we're talking about, what's related. So Dara, in Dara's videos, says a lot of like commentary that Dara receives from the aunties. So one of them was, one auntie asked their mom why she lets Dara do things. Keep her in the house. Don't let her get out of the house. Bubble wrap her. I was like, what? Yeah.
Auntie needs to stay.
Yes. Maybe you should do the bubble wrap.
Yeah. Bubble wrap around the mouth. We don't want to hear unsolicited things.
Bubble wrap around the mouth. That's so good.
Oh gosh.
I love it. And then another comment was, an auntie came up to Dara and said, "You look fine, so you must be fine. Mind your own business. Turn around and leave."
If she's fine, why are you commenting on it? Mm-hmm. We don't need it.
Mm-hmm. And then Dara said that when Dara went bald and went into public, an auntie came up and said, "You're not going to keep it like that, are you? Wear the wig." Mm-hmm.
How does her having a wig or not having a wig affect us?
Right.
How?
Right. And then the last comment, which was an uncle, not an auntie, at a wedding, walked up, and Dara said during the video that she didn't even know the uncle. So like the uncle just came up to Dara during the wedding and said, "Why don't you give me blessings? Because you look like a monk."
What?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Goodness. What? This person cannot make jokes. They do not know this person.
Well, it's like, I was like, that's not okay. And it goes back to how normalized commentary is. I know we've talked about it in season 1 a little bit about how normalized it is, and it's not okay. It's so toxic.
Absolutely not.
But I commend. Of all,
you don't know the person. Second of all, why are you making jokes? You don't know that person is there in their life. If they're there in their life and can joke about it, okay, maybe that's okay. You don't know this person. The audacity. What?
Exactly. But I commend Dara for sharing her story.
Yeah.
She's beautiful. And it was nice to look through her account and learn a little bit more about her. So Dara, go Dara.
You do you. Yeah, you do you. Get all
Tell those aunties and uncles to mind their own business, turn around, bubble wrap their mouth.
We'll roast them for her when she shares.
There you go. So that was my research and my background.
Thank you.
I know it's a lot.
That was really enlightening.
I hope so. I hope I didn't go too much all over the place. I tried to keep it as minimal as I can, but also as rich as I can and meaningful.
That's exactly what I got. Very concise and specific, but diverse.
Good.
That was good research.
Thank you. I know I learned some new things by doing that too. I was like, wow, these numbers, and then, the bi-directional relationship between chronic illness and depression.
Right.
It's very interesting.
I never thought about it like that.
Me neither. Okay, you ready for my story?
Yes.
Okay. So this topic hits home for me. I know I talked about it in many previous episodes. I think I talked about this in the very first episode we did too. So this definitely hits home, right? I think it's attachment, and so I definitely did talk about it. Yeah. But I'm excited to dive a little bit deeper into it and kind of dive in together in my story and just my experience with chronic illness. So just a little bit of background review. I grew up with chronic illness surrounding me. So before I was born, my dad was diagnosed with multiple chronic illnesses. And I'm going to preface this too, and I'm going to go into this too. My parents get a little bit guarded with disclosing information about their chronic illnesses, so I might not give too much detail regarding that, but I'm going to talk about it as well, like as much as I can to respect their privacy. So So that was my dad, born with multiple chronic illnesses before I was born, even before he got married. Um, and then right after I was born, my mom was diagnosed with chronic illness, and my sister was born with multiple chronic illnesses and also was recently diagnosed with more chronic illnesses as well. So when I'm looking at my family in a bird's eye view, when it comes to like my extended family, my parents, siblings, my cousins, both sides of the family, mom's side and dad's side, diabetes is everywhere. In one of my classes in grad school, we had to create a family, like a family medical tree, like a medical diagnosis tree. Have you ever made one of those where you like shade? You kind of
Yeah.
shade if they have the illness, but then leave it unshaded
Genome.
if they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it called?
Genogram, I think.
Yeah. Or something like that. I know it starts with a
Yeah.
G. And I remember making that for my family. And it was just me, unshaded, and then literally like shades everywhere, which was so interesting to me. That like, my genes have it all, has it, And it was normal, chronic illness being surrounded with that background, right, in my life. It was very normal in my household growing up that there was multiple specialty doctor appointments that were happening regularly. There was always talks of taking medicine, organizing pills was normal, checking blood sugar was normal. As we learned through the research that chronic illness is linked to mental health, I kind of use this, my research and my reflection, as a way to look back. And I do think, looking back, that chronic illness did affect each one of us very differently, but did affect our mental health. So I think being a South Asian family, there was so much stigma. There is so much stigma around chronic illness. My parents would always be reluctant to disclose any information about their physical and mental health or any physical or mental symptoms to friends, close friends, loved ones, close family members, including their own siblings. So like even during like family gatherings, like my dad or my family would just kind of keep everything under wraps, or like if they need to take medicine, they'll go in the other room. Like it's not very open for them. And I think this is partially due to our culture. Unfortunately, chronic illness is stigma. It's viewed as a weakness. And I think my parents internalized that, unfortunately. And I think they like are living through that. And, now I kind of wanted to go into the effects of my family diagnosis. Now, this part of my story is kind of the effect on me. Someone who is not diagnosed with the chronic illness, but it's surrounded by one a lot, right? So I've talked about this, my being a sibling. I did experience many emotions regarding this. I'm constantly sad and worried about my parents' and sister's health, angry that they are the ones who have to deal with this, and jealous, especially when I was younger. I noticed my parents spending more time with my sister, which is understandable and is appropriate due to her illness management. But I did feel left out, and I didn't feel that my parents were spending as much time with me. And this made me really hyper focus on my own health in a way. And just looking into my work too, that I do every day, I work with patients and families diagnosed with cancer like leukemia, lymphoma. And I work with these families, I follow them for years, and I see the effect of the chronic illness on the family because I get to see them on a regular basis. Not just the parents, not just the patient, but the siblings too. And that's part of my job, is like helping siblings cope with what the patient, their brother or sister, is going through. And literally every single sibling I've spoken to in this last 3 years, every sibling education I've done, no matter if they were 18, 19, 20, or 3 or 4 or 5 years old, every single sibling has said either they're angry, they're jealous, they feel alone, they feel scared, they feel worried. Every single sibling. And that was just in my work. It's empowering that I'm able to provide that support, but also like really sad and hard that chronic illness doesn't just affect that one person that is diagnosed with it, right? It's like that circle as well, which is sometimes overlooked also. And so that I was just thinking about that too, is just how important even the parents, right? Their whole life has changed. They have to take off work, do FMLA, they have to change their schedule, their social schedule. There were so many families that didn't even go on a vacation for years before they could, or they wanted to, or their patient was healthy enough to go to. There's just so many aspects of how life, like you said, it's invisible. It can be, or not all chronic illnesses are invisible, but some are, and it can change your life. It's lifestyle changes that can be really hard for everyone. So, kind of going back to my experience, I think seeing chronic illness and health be such a central part of my household that kind of at a very young age made me hyper focus on my own health. So I know I talked about this. I started working out really intentionally in high school. I take meal prepping very seriously, you know that, and healthy habits very seriously. And I'm doing this with the mindset that and I've talked about this with my own doctor, that there are genetic factors and markers, but I'm doing whatever I can to take care of my physical health and mental health to, like, eliminate or even or delay, if it's inevitable or if it's in my genes.
Doing what's in your control to the best
Right.
that you can.
Right. Right. And I know I've gotten into this a little bit too in the past of how much that sibling guilt has been internalized, right? Of like why I talked about this in therapy sessions too. Like I'm older than my sister. I'm like older sister. I don't like to see her suffer. It's really hard for me to see her suffer. I want her to be happy. I want her to be successful. And there's just so many instances, even till now, where I'm just like, why her and not me? Right? Like those types of questions like play around in my head.
Survivor's skill.
Exactly. And it's hard to grapple with, that concept. But definitely working it through, finding ways on how I can show up for my parents and my sister, and how I can show compassion, how I can, be an active listener, how I can be supportive. And, I will admit, oftentimes, like, knowing how easy it was to, like, make my meal prep or make my, workout schedule. Like, I know that mental health is so much tied with their chronic illnesses that it might be easier for me to make those regimens or lifestyle changes, but it might not for them because it's, again, the lived experience. So I have seen, and my sister also, how much chronic illness has affected her. And I don't want to tell her story, right? Of course, but I have seen like her behaviors and like just ways that her chronic illness has affected her mental health when it comes to like her self-esteem and like how much capable she feels. So definitely have seen the effects of chronic illness on mental health. But I'm so proud of my sister. Like we talk about our therapy sessions all the time with each other, and she's, doing the work she can to help herself, which I'm really proud of her. And I think me and my sister, and I've talked about this, like us making these lifestyle changes or practices to help keep our bodies and mental health and physical health as healthy as possible, has kind of modeled these practices for my mom. So I've noticed her being more open to discussions about disease management. We go on walks together, which I love whenever I visit home. And again, I want to say that when someone outside who does not have the lived experience, I cannot fully understand what it means to live with it. But again, I've always tried to be intentional with my family to help them feel loved and cared for, no matter what decisions they make, no matter what step they are in managing their disease or illness. That's really important and key, because I've had friends or I've experienced this myself where I just feel like, why can't you just change your diet? Or why can't you just eat more of this? Like, why is it so hard? But it's not that, right? It's more than that. Like, I know for my sister, she's had to make changes to her medicines, pills, lifestyle changes multiple times over her life. Like adding another pill or adding another requirement. I can't imagine the burden of that. So, yeah, that's my story.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I didn't quite realize this when we decided to do this topic, but I think this is an interesting topic for us to talk about because we get to present both sides.
Exactly.
You're presenting the side of being a family member of loved ones who has it, and I will soon be talking about as I've already talked about the podcast and with you
Yeah.
on chronic illnesses. So I
Right.
didn't think about this, but this was an interesting topic for us to choose.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Mm. Well, thank you for sharing. I know this, as we've clearly talked about in therapy, doing our individual works, this is a sensitive topic for even us, being on two different sides of the spectrum, but still it's a sensitive topic for us. So
Right.
I'm proud of you for sharing. Thank
you.
you for sharing. And
Thank
I'm
you.
certainly proud of, your sister. And it's a lot to deal with as an individual.
Mhm.
And every new thing that you have to do can feel like, another thing,
Right.
and it can sometimes take you right back to the beginning, or what feels like back to the beginning, as you
Mhm.
process, find acceptance, and
Yes,
it's a lot.
it is
But
a
what
lot.
that means is it's also a lot, like you said, as a loved one, to witness that happening again and maybe again.
Right.
So I'm proud of you too for not just,
Thank you.
trying to talk through this and heal through this for her and for your family, but also for you.
Thank you.
Showing up and
Appreciate
learning
it.
how to support you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it, girl. Always. Lots of love for you. So, to talk about mine story and all of this, it's no secret I've talked about it so many times on this podcast, but it'll be an interesting to go really in depth into it. So, my first personal experience with chronic illness is my hypothyroidism, as I've talked about.
Mhm.
And this is an interesting one because, as I've said before, I don't think I've ever called it out, actually. I have been wildly depressed at the time, and I didn't realize I was depressed. And it kind of like snuck up on me. And I think it was so subtle over time that it snuck up on, my support system as well. So nobody really could see that I was like really in the depth of that depression either. But all that stress, all that depression eventually led to my forceful acknowledgement of my hypothyroidism, as you know, when I couldn't walk anymore and I had to go to the doctor because of all that like salt retention in my legs and the pain. And because I let it get so far, I had all the symptoms. Like literally, if you Google hypothyroidism symptoms, I had every single one of them.
Wow.
It was a lot to deal with, especially because not only was I dealing with like, oh my God, I have a medical diagnosis. What does that mean? Oh my God, it's chronic. What does that mean? But also I was depressed. And so it was difficult to kind of deal with both because, we talked about how having chronic illnesses can lead to depression. Well, I was depressed. I had the chronic illness, but I was also depressed prior to that. That maybe played a part in my genetic expression of that hypothyroidism gene turning on. Right. So it was like kind of layers to sort through. And as I was going through the stages of grief that we talked about right in the previous episode. And it was all over the place because for a while, since I had let it get so bad, they didn't know what kind of thyroid issues I was having. At the time, I had hypothyroidism, but they couldn't figure out if it was the autoimmune version or if it was just hypothyroidism, because it would require maybe a little bit different approaches.
Right.
Not to mention my levels when they detected it, what's normal, that range, I think is between, I forget now, it's been a while since I've had to check in because I've been so stable, but I think it's like 0.0 something up to like 2 point something like that. My numbers were, if I remember correctly, in the thousands.
Wow.
Which is insane.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was that particular day and the way that it was read, but like I said, I had waited so long that it was truly on the other end of the spectrum. And I don't know if my doctor was joking, but my doctor was like, girl, if you had not come in today, you could have gone into a coma. What were you thinking? And I was like,
oh my gosh.
I was shocked. I don't know if that was a joke or not, but I was like, what?
Yeah, that's scary to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope it wasn't a joke. Like, that's not a cool joke to say to someone.
Yeah.
But that is scary to hear. And like that added to that layer of grief over losing my old self, the one that didn't have to worry about what this meant, the one that didn't have to think about medications, the one that didn't have to worry about recovery,
Mm-hmm.
and the one who didn't need to contend with my responsibility and how I got here, and not like
Mm-hmm.
catching certain things prior to that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not always a productive route to go. But that was
Yeah.
something that I had to, as I talked about in a previous episode too, learn how to forgive myself for
Mm.
not knowing what I didn't know.
Yeah. It's a lot of loss too, like losing
Yeah.
that priority view.
Yeah. And just really like a change in
Right.
how you approach life and how you see, at least for me, and how I saw what I was doing
Mm-hmm.
that led me down to that path. All the things that I was doing that was really bad for me, whether that be poor sleep hygiene, whether that be poor diet choices.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in college, taking a lot of classes and
Yeah.
not having a lot of time. But even then, like, it's my life, right? And ideally, that hopefully that doesn't happen to everybody. It doesn't, right? But choices are made, they have consequences. And as I was dealing with all of that and it finally stabilized, I got my second chronic illness,
Mm.
PCOS,
Mm.
polycystic ovarian syndrome. PCOS is very, very common, especially nowadays. I don't know the exact statistic on it, but I think it's like 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women have it. It's
Wow.
something similar to that effect. And that one is a bigger one that I still am going through figuring out. And like, that one truly feels like a chronic illness to me. The hypothyroidism, I needed medication. I take medication every single day. And once I found my stable point, I don't really notice it as much.
Oh,
So
okay.
it feels very
Good.
treatable.
Yeah,
I don't have a lot of grief around that. I found my peace with it.
that's good.
But with PCOS, it's not
Mm.
quite like that. PCOS doesn't have a specific cure. There is no magic pill that makes it
Mm.
better. There is no specific cure that really treats the symptom,
Mm-hmm.
or all the symptoms, I should say. And dealing with the PCOS was a bit confusing too, because a lot of the time, some of the symptoms for PCOS, a lot of POC women, particularly South Asian women, are already going to have. Like, for example, facial hair is one, like
Mm.
hirsutism, acne, weight gain, mood swings,
Mm-hmm.
pre-diabetic. All of these things are very common for a lot of people, in particular, and like darkness of skin, like
Mm-hmm.
hyperpigmentation. All of
Mm-hmm.
these things are very common for South Asians. And so it's often not really fully diagnosed.
Mm.
And technically, if you have PCOS, you can be diagnosed with like an ultrasound of your ovaries. If you have cysts, you have PCOS. That's one way to do it.
Mm.
But contrary to its name, that's not a requirement. You can not have any cysts and still have PCOS because of the other symptoms.
Oh, interesting. I did
And
not know
so,
that.
yeah, and it's all just like a verbal confirmation. There's no like test to say you have PCOS. It's more just, do you have these symptoms? And like I said, a lot of these symptoms can coexist with just being a South Asian woman. So that was a really confusing thing, because I think I've always maybe had borderline PCOS. It's just never really fully manifested.
Mm-hmm.
And once I did, not having a cure and realizing that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of lifestyle changes were required was, for me, like, another thing that I have to like contend with.
Like the burden
Another thing I have
feeling.
to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was a lot of grief with that, a lot of avoidance of that. Like you were
Mm-hmm.
saying earlier, I did not look at PCOS diagnosis and be like, great, what's all the information I can get? How can I tackle this head on? I heard the diagnosis and I was like, no cure. Oh, great. Well, F it, whatever. I don't want to
Yeah.
think about it. It is what it is. What's going to happen is going to happen.
Yeah.
I was really stuck in that frustration, that avoidance.
And this really
hopelessness.
common mentality.
Yeah.
Like, my loved ones that share very similar. Like, why put in the work if there's no cure? Like, I'm going to have to get this kidney transplant anyways when I'm older. Like, why do I need to take care of it? Right?
Right. Exactly. That hopelessness, that what's that point?
Mm-hmm.
That's really the part where that depression sets in, right? That's that link to the depression of, well, why bother doing anything then? I'm resigned to my fate kind of attitude. But ultimately, I think that while I went through that what if game, while I went through and continue to go through, I should say, as well, for some of these things, like fear, for example, over my fertility, and like if and when I'm ready to have a kid, like what would that mean for that?
Yeah.
Not to mention some of the things that I currently still occasionally contend with is like frustration or anger, because PCOS can feel like an invisible illness for me because it's something I'm always going to have. There's no cure. It's more about lifestyle changes, which I've made and I continue to choose to make. But if I don't choose to make all those lifestyle changes in 1 week or 1 day, I've got someone I live with who really loves me and cares for me and is like, get on it. What are you doing? You have to do this. And that can feel really suffocating sometimes, right? And it can feel like kind of shameful, but also like, oh, I just need a break.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes.
It's a lot of work. I'm sure it takes a lot of energy, right? Draining.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's a lifestyle change, which means there's so many pieces of the life that need to come together, which is active choices in so many areas of your life.
Right.
Your diet, your movement, your attitude to how you approach this chronic thing, your sleep, what you do, the quality of what you do, when you do it, specific things and specific details and the nuances of it all. It's a lot to do and to focus on. And it can feel really alone in those moments because sometimes it can feel like to the other person, well, you already know what you have to do. Why aren't you doing it? If you know it's going to make you feel better, do that. But it's not that simple.
It's not. You're exactly right.
Yeah. And the other thing that's quite frustrating about it is usually when you go to the doctors, like I said, there's no cure, but the best thing they can say is eat well, move a lot, lose weight. But the thing that most PCOS women find, and the reason I was so avoidant, is because of the frustration of that advice, lose weight. But while that is true, losing weight helps with PCOS and alleviates some of the symptoms. It does. PCOS makes it difficult to lose weight because of the root issues that cause PCOS. So it's a catch-22. Losing weight helps PCOS, but if you have PCOS, it's hard to lose weight. So, you know, that battle of being stuck and that frustration was something that kind of really fueled that avoidance for a long time. And I think is a big barrier and a reason that people, like women who have PCOS, really struggle with in general, is this helpful and yet very unhelpful advice.
That makes sense to me, though. Like, it's very complicated.
Yeah. It's a bit of a runaround.
Right. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like that is a solution given for many different chronic illnesses. And
eat your fruits, eat your veggies, work out, lose weight. That's like the standard advice.
For diabetes, I feel like I've heard that. High cholesterol. And I get it. Like, I do understand.
It's true.
It's true. I'm sure it helps, but I'm just like, where is the like mental health aspect of our physical health advice, where it's like, okay, if that's like something that you need to do, like, let's see how we can help that make happen, right? Like, what does your motivation look like? What do your habits look like? Like, where's that piece when it comes to, and I'm sure like there are some more providers out there that are becoming like that. I've heard about it, but I want that to be the majority.
More holistic, care of, you know, team, but it's not just like the mental health side of it, addressing that. I think it's also important and often overlooked is addressing the root causes of these things. Through my own research, not anything the doctors have said to me, I found that there are specific root issues that can make PCOS, like the symptoms really exist and like make it worse. For example, inflammation. So inflammatory foods, dairy, gluten are the two that, you know, are most talked about with PCOS, can make PCOS symptoms worse.
Interesting.
Insulin resistance, which I'm finding is actually has a hand in a lot of chronic diseases and just in general. That's a big player too, our insulin resistance, but that's not talked about. No doctor has educated me on what that could look like, what I could
Right.
try, has walked me through that process.
Yeah.
And like, that's a whole other conversation, I feel like, about the medical system and the way they work.
Mm-hmm.
We won't get into it. But the idea is don't just take what your doctors say at face value. There is truth to it, but also do more digging. Because the one thing I've learned from all of this is it's your life.
Mm-hmm.
And while we might trust experts to be the expert, sometimes they are not going to give you a comprehensive expertise.
Right.
And it might still be out there. So do your own research, do your own digging, find your own support systems. Because I think that's important too in a lot of these chronic illnesses that we talk about, having a good support system.
Right.
In whatever form that may come. If your family or your friends are saying things like, like, oh, don't talk about this, or like, oh, this again, that's not the support system you need. And if you're not finding that within the relationships in your life, then I'm sure there are, support groups for people with chronic illnesses. And at the end of the day, we all need that support because it can be a really lonely experience. So seeking those out can be helpful too. Yeah. And the newest layer of all the chronic illnesses I'm dealing with right now is medication. So I recently did get a scan of my ovaries, like the ultrasound.
Okay.
And I actually did find that I had cysts in my ovaries. And so the only way to treat it was to take birth control. And I was so resistant to that. I had actually heard this from another gynecologist, an OB-GYN, a while ago. But again, I was in a very avoidant phase because I felt like they don't really understand. They're just keep telling me to take medications. They don't get it. There's no cure. I don't want to take birth control just for no reason. It's going to mess with my hormones. It's going to mask my symptoms, which it does do all of that. But for me and for some people who have PCOS, if you have cysts, that can turn cancerous if you don't treat it. So while birth control is going to maybe not be the right solution for everybody, sometimes it is the right solution. So once I stopped being stubborn about it and I really understood what it means, because I found the doctor who actually listened and empathized and
that's good.
Took the time to really understand me and explain to me and understand my fears, I was more willing to do that. So I think the other thing that really helped me through all this is find the right doctor for you.
Right. Which is, I'm sure, so difficult. That's like a whole nother added energy and draining, to find the right doctor.
Yeah. My first doctor, the one that I had when I was growing up, who my dad really loved, was just super demeaning. And I had brought something I had learned. I was like, hey, what do you think of this? And I get it. Being a doctor, maybe you're a little bit tired of people bringing to you things, but he was really rude. He snapped at me. He was kind of like, well, if it's on the internet, it must be true. Why don't you try it? And I was like,
that's not nice.
Really Excuse me. By that.
Where is your empathy and customer service? You work with people. Yeah, that's not how you're supposed to talk to your patients.
No. You're the expert. I'm asking you. I'm not saying this is what's right. I'm asking you if you think it's right.
Right.
But anyways, once I found the right person for me, I was more willing to do these things and really make life changes. And that's all it took. It took one person who was an expert on the topic who would just empathize. That's literally all it took for me to be, It's all it took for me to be like, all right, screw it. This is my life. I got to do things to do what I can, do what's in my control, and then, deal with the rest.
Right.
So I started taking birth control, and now I'm just figuring out how to, I always forget it though, because now that I'm in Dallas near all the family members, I forget to bring it with me, because when I go outside and hang out with family, they're like, oh, stay longer, do this, do that. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't. I have to rush back home and take my pill on time.
Yeah.
New challenges that I'm learning how to make more routine for me. It's another layer.
That is another layer. Routines.
taking it on time.
Shaping your social encounters surrounding your medication schedule, right? If you have to eat before your medication, shaping your eating schedule around your medication schedule. There's just so many layers.
So much that goes into it. Exactly. It's a roller coaster, but educate yourself, seek support, be patient with yourself, and go at your own pace. I think those are very important things to remember. And also, have some empathy and compassion for yourself. If your chronic illness requires you to make a lot of changes, which it most likely will, it's okay if you're not going to be able to make all those changes all at once.
Right.
It's going to be a lifetime thing. Yeah. It's going to be a lifetime thing.
Change is not easy and it's not quick.
It is not. So do what you can. Always something. Mindset, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's my story.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for, being so open and sharing your story, telling your story. And I think when we talked about the stigma pieces, like you just sharing very openly about your routines, your practices, like debunks all of that, right? Like, I love how you shared your story in not a way that was like showing any internalized stigma, but strength and how you're coping and what your coping strategies are. And I admire that so much. I love it.
So sweet.
Yes. There was just watching you and talking to you about it kind of exuded that energy. It was like, I know I have to deal with this and I'm coping. It sucks. Like you were real, right? Like it sucks. I don't like it at times. You're human. But, you're showing how you're coping with it, but you're also like showing the strength behind all of this that you share and show and have. So thank you.
Took me a while to get there.
Understandable. But you are here. Look at that. I'm so proud of you. I am.
Thank you. I feel seen.
That Anusha initially who wasn't, able to walk or went to that first doctor visit, she would be so proud of you.
I'm a long way. She'd be very surprised. She'd be like, who are you?
She's like, we did that. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I'm very, very proud of you.
Thank you,
how far you've come. Thank you for sharing.
You know what? Me too.
You should be.
Right.
That's an act of self-compassion right there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You forget to look back and see your own progress, but you're right. I did make a lot of progress.
You have. Yeah.
Yeah. I made a lot of changes. Still work in progress. Nowhere near where I need to be or want to be, but work in progress.
Baby steps. Steps in the right direction.
Always something. I know this was a little bit of a heavy topic sometimes in some places, but it's an important one to get the conversation really started. And if it's already been started, then to continue on that conversation because it's an important one.
It is.
It's like you said in your statistic, if a lot of us struggle with these chronic illnesses, it's about time we make it more compassionate space.
Not stigmatized.
More normalized one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alrighty. Shall I see us out?
Yes.
Okay. So a reminder, if our podcast has resonated with you and you'd like to share your story with us or ask us any questions about this topic, you can reach us at talksouthasian2me@gmail.com, or you can find us on all the socials at the handle @talksouthasian2me. See you all next time.
See you. Bye.